What's going on, everybody? It's Aurora YJ here, coming at you with a brand new video for the month of February 2022. We have just finished the first month of the new year, and it's been a bit draining. Not only with just all the content I've been pumping out myself, but also, you know, the release of Master Duel, the ages it took for the ban list to come out, with still none, like, fully confirmed until a few months, which I find really strange. I don't think they've ever done something like that before. Probably just got really sick of people commenting on their discussion boards and everything. But regardless, January not only brought us the new ban list, but also a new set in the form of the Grand Creators towards the end, meaning that this meta is going to be shaken up a little bit compared to what it was before. And with that being said, even though I already made a top 5 meta deck list that you can also check out up there in the corner, I'm also going to be making my monthly tier list, this time for February of 2022, discussing all of the decks that you may be seeing here and there that aren't like super random jank. Before I get started with the video, however, I do want to say that this is going to be based off personal opinion, predictions, outlooks based on the ban list, the sets, all that stuff like that, and the opinions of others online. So please be sure not to attack me, anyone in my comment section, or any other creators for their opinions. It's just a card game, it's super unneeded. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the February 2022 meta tier list. Now first up, we have Dinosaur, and unfortunately, unlike what I and a lot of others predicted, Dinosaur didn't get Misk back to multiple copies, which is really strange to me, considering the release of Dinorphia coming out in Battles of Chaos, even though a lot of builds don't even play Misk. I mean, still, you would think they would do that just to support, like, you know, Dino stuff, not to mention all the Dino reprints they've been doing lately. I don't know, it's super weird, so I'm kind of peeved about that, and so unfortunately, I'm going to keep Dino in the rogue category. It is pretty good going second, especially now that we have 3 Raigeki, which is hilarious. However, I don't think that the deck can really hold its own compared to some of the top decks anymore. This does come from a Dino player, by the way, but the main problems with the deck tend to be bricking, and with Prosperity still so unaffordable, it's a lot harder for some of the more budget Dino players to even afford that kind of stuff. Not to mention that, unlike what a lot of people will tell you, the deck is incredibly fragile to hand traps. If you open a single Ash Blossom against Dinosaur, chances are you're winning right there, because people don't seem to realize you can just hit the graveyard. If you hand trap the graveyard, or if you trap the graveyard, or anything like that, the deck explodes. And so for those reasons and more, Dinosaur unfortunately will have to stay in the rogue category. Next up, we have Alistair.deck, aka just any sort of like invoked clusterfuck variant. I'm going to put that as our very first tier 1 deck. Not biased or anything, because I am starting to play this deck myself, but Invoked is really good. The main benefit to the deck being the fact that it's multiple different splashable engines that can all function on their own. You have the Invoked engine, which is 7 different ways to search Alistair, and then the 2 Invocation, so that's about 9 cards there. And then about a couple cards in your extra deck, depending on what you like to play. Then you have the Dogmatica engine, which just saw Nadir Servant get hit to 2, however, that doesn't really matter too much. You just lose a tiny bit of consistency, but the deck is known for its consistency, so it's not really that big of a problem. But you have the Dogmatica engine that can dump things from your extra deck to the graveyard, like Natus for popping, App Cologne for free Schism and other shit all searches, Titaniclad for more searches during the end phase. Basically, the Dogmatica engine functions as sort of its own little deal, where it gets bodies on board and sets up a bunch of disruptions with things like Punishment and Fleur-de-Lis. And then you have the Shadal engine, which can either be solely in the extra deck, plus the Schism in the main, or it can be like what I'm currently playing, especially because I'm on the budget and I don't have the DPE or the Prosperities for it, and you can play an actual small Shadal package in the deck, you know, Shadal Fusion, El Shadal Fusion, Squamata, Beast, Wendy, Hedgehogs, things like that. But speaking of DP and Prosperity, this deck can really utilize those cards very well. It's probably one of the better decks to utilize DPE, and again, Fusion Destiny also got hit to 2, but it really doesn't matter. Like, that was such a silly hit. But overall, the deck is super simple in a sense, and it's super functional because everything can function on its own, especially if you're playing the 3 engines and not just the 2. And so for those reasons and more, I'm putting Invoked as their first tier 1 deck of this tier list. So next up, we have Adignister, and as per usual, I'm gonna have to put Adignister in the lower part of the rogue category. Any hand trap on Dark Templar usually hurts really bad, not to mention that sitting on a towers, be it 3k or 6k, usually isn't that great anymore, unfortunately. Yeah, people aren't really playing Kaijus or anything like that, at least not for now, I don't know. But with things like Boral Sword and Access Code being able to get bigger than it, and all sorts of things like that, Adignister really just doesn't do enough for this current meta. Going second, I think it can do a lot better, believe it or not. However, it just doesn't do much right now. Next up, we have Sword Soul, and that is going to be our next tier 1 deck, currently the best in the tier 1 from the ones we have so far. Sword Soul didn't receive, like, any real hits. I'm talking specifically Tenyi Sword Soul, by the way. Pure Sword Soul's kind of cheeks. But Tenyi Sword Soul didn't really receive any hits. Funnily enough, their only hit was Desires to 1, which, contrary to what everyone else is saying, I personally believe that's why they hit Desires to 1, not because it's a good staple card that a lot of decks are using, but more so because they didn't want to hit the Tenyi or the Sword Soul package. They did hit Arch Nemesis Protoss on the January 2022 Forbidden Unlimited list, however, that doesn't really do too much to the deck, as a lot of the times they didn't even mainboard it. It was mainly just a side deck card that could blow out a lot of different matchups. You know, popping your Baronet for the Bird Up matchup, popping itself for the PK matchup, things like that. Overall, the deck is still perfectly fine. Normal Summon Moye, Special Summon Ashina, all that stuff. None of that was touched, and you're probably going to be seeing it for a long time in the future. So next up, we have Cyber Dragon, and I'm going to put it... I'm going to put it just above Adagnister, considering the fact that it can out things like Zeus and things in the extra monster zone pretty easily, like Appaloosa. But other than that, I feel like Cyber Dragon still isn't in a format where it can really shine. Typically, it shines in formats where there are a lot of machines or a lot of power cards going to the extra monster zone, like if a lot of decks are running Appaloosa. But right now, it's just not doing too much. The end board usually consists of, like, Infinity DPE, or if you're playing the Stardust Synchron package, you can get, like, Infinity Shen Shen, which isn't really that much, unfortunately. Going second, it did get a little bit of a boost from the Cyberdark structure deck, because it did get the Cyberdark Chimera, which allows Power Bond OTKs to come up a lot. So going second, it is pretty swell. However, going first, it doesn't do too much. If your opponent forces you to go first, basically, you're kind of fucked. And so, unfortunately, Cyber Dragon is still in the rogue category for now. Next up, we have Altergeist, and yeah, Altergeist is also going to go in the rogue category. I know that's a lot of rogue so far, and I did put Altergeist in tier 2, I believe, the last couple of my tier lists. However, Pukri didn't do enough. Neither did Memory Gant or anything like that. The deck is still just kind of mid overall. Sorry to use, like, lingo or anything, but it's basically, like, the best way to describe it is just really mid. You can just honestly play better back row decks, and unfortunately, it can't fall back on one or the other too heavily. It can't fall back on traps or monsters too heavily. It's too much of a balance between both, and so if half of that is gone, then the other half is, like, completely dead in the water. Unfortunately, Altergeist just isn't doing too much. And I know I say unfortunately because that's because I personally enjoy Altergeist. However, a lot of other decks, or a lot of other players, I should say, I'm sorry, they really don't like Altergeist. Also, with Imperial Order being gone, the deck did receive a big hindrance in the form of that, even with something like Secret Village of the Spellcasters, and so Altergeist I'm going to have to put in the rogue category. Next up is Madolche, and I'm going to be a bit generous and put it as our first tier 2 deck. Remember that Small World did come out all the way back in Burst of Destiny, and it did help the deck win the very first regionals where we came back, and while that hasn't been doing too much now, I feel like it's just going to take that one or two, like, person team or whatever that are going to, like, truly break this deck. Unfortunately, it does suffer a little bit from bricking, but Small World did help that a little bit, and I think people are just playing a bit too much with things like Crossout Designator for things like Nibiru. However, the deck has a built-in anti-Nibiru combo, and so I don't feel like it's that big of a deal. Also, not to mention the fact that you could play combo Madolche, however, you can also play a more back row heavy version of Madolche, things like Ice Dragon's Prison, and all sorts of stuff like that. Other power back row, even Torrential Tribute if you really feel like it, the Solemns, all sorts of stuff. I feel like the deck can definitely see a lot of competitive use depending on who's piloting it, but that is kind of the problem, is it's who's piloting it, but I will be generous and put it in tier 2 for now. Next up, we have Drytron, and yeah, they did receive an EVA ban on the last ban list. However, I'm going to keep it in the tier 1.5 category, and here's why. So, Drytron has evolved. They no longer really care about sitting on, like, 6 Herald of Ultimateness negates and, like, shit like that, right? Now the deck is a lot stronger in the sense that it doesn't really have to rely on that or any of, like, the super big, like, fairy cards or anything, because they can just play the Megalith build. And the Megalith build, if you don't know, basically relies on using Megalith full in order to summon Megalith Bethor on the opponent's turn, allowing you to pop cards on the field equal to the number of ritual monsters with different names in your grave, or even, it could just be even ritual monsters period in your grave, and you're probably going to go through a couple of those on your turn. Not to mention they can also end off on Draconids, which, while they didn't like doing that very much before, it's still a 4K unmonster targetable body that can also send up to, like, 2 cards your opponent controls to the grave on their turn, which is really, really solid, not to mention that next turn they can OTK with it, as well as they can end off on DPE with the Scythe Lock with Dagda. So I think the deck, honestly, is perfectly fine, because it no longer has to rely too much on the fairy stuff. Also, the end board is a lot less susceptible to removal, such as like a single, you know, like Kaiju or something like that. I don't know, I'm just trying to think of a quick example. Also, the deck, if it really wanted to, it could just rely on Van Ruler again, which is really, really funny. And so I think Drytron isn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon, so keep an eye out for it. Next up on our list, we have Eldritch, and guys, I'm putting Eldritch in Tier 1, granted at the bottom of Tier 1, however, what everyone has to realize is that even though Imperial Order was gone, and it is mostly only seeing good play in Master Duel, Skill Drain is back to 3 in the TCG, which is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of players. I don't think 99% of the player base wanted Skill Drain back to 3, but here we are. And with people playing Master Duel, they've realized that 3 Skill Drain with Eldritch is really, really stupid, and so even with Imperial Order gone, 3 Skill Drain comes and basically replaces it, and the deck becomes a really big powerhouse. Essentially, you're just falling back on Skill Drain and other floodgates like that, while also like constantly going through your Eldixirs, your Golden Lands, and just going like over and over, looping things like Conch, Haquero, Sanguine, Black Awakening, things like that. So overall, Eldritch, I believe, is super, super solid this format, unfortunately, because I don't like the deck. It's really something you have to look out for, especially because purple cards are still purple cards, you know, Solemns and things like that, Ice Dragons, Prisons, whatever. And also, Eldritch being sending removal is really, really nice, and being able to summon itself back with 1,000 more attack, and having the destruction protection, not to mention Lord of the Heavenly Prison being there for a free Gustav material, free setting of something like Eldixir of Black Awakening, and things like that, and just being a 3k body, period. The deck is super, super strong right now, and I would definitely cite in a lot more back row removal if you haven't been already. So next up we have Flunderese, and I don't know if I want to be like super generous and put it at the lower part of tier 1.5, or if I want to put it at like the higher part of tier 2, because what we have to think about is that Flunderese is getting their new card in Battles of Chaos, and it's a common, meaning it's super accessible, and this deck is going to be seeing a lot of play because of how budget it is, even with things like Mega Raiza being a bit pricey. Honestly, I'm going to put it at the very low end of tier 1.5. I feel like the quick play spell is just enough to push the deck up into the tier 1.5 category, being able to banish your things and get them ready to be added back to hand as soon as you normal summon, not to mention being able to search for either the field spell, which is super, super powerful for the deck, or just your Robina, which starts like your entire turn, and you gain 500 life points, which is really funny, but it can help in time, like, a lot. And so I feel like Flunderese is going to be a lot better than it ever was before, and so please be on the lookout for that, or else we're going to get Barrier Statue in Mega Raiza. So next up we have Fluffle, and thankfully I was able to put this on my next tier list after having it in my last tier list, because Artifact Scythe was not hit, nor was Dagda or anything else in that package. And so I'm going to keep it in the road category. Granted, I'll put it a little bit below, like Dinosaur right now, because Dinosaur did get that tiny boost in the form of 3 Regeki if they really want to play it. And also because the deck is a little bit clunky, you do brick a good portion of the time, and it really relies on RNG and having just a good hand period and being able to solve any awkward hands. And so it really depends on the pilot and the exact list, and your basically just your RNG period. Even though that is the case, the deck is still super strong, being able to OTK if it chooses, especially with the 3 Regeki, but also mainly being able to just Scythe Lock super easy without having to go into the DPE or Verte package. Just being able to natively pop the Artifact Scythe is super, super solid. Not to mention Fluffle Penguin is still silly. I would like to see more support for this deck, you know, fusion from deck. That would be really amazing as a Fluffle enthusiast myself. However, for now, that is not the case, but I will be keeping it in the rogue category. Next up, we have Skystriker, and yet Skystriker lost its greatest enemy in the form of Imperial Order, and with anti-spell still running around, like, even though that is a thing, I'm going to put it in the tier 1.5 category. I'm going to put it just under Drytron, because I feel like Drytron has a bit more potential, especially because Skystriker didn't actually get any cards back. However, the loss of Imperial Order in the card game is going to be monumental for this deck, because you can't just basically FTK them by flipping that anymore. Also, the fact that they can still access the DPE stuff, because Fusion Destiny, yeah, it got hit to 2. However, you know, it's still perfectly fine. Overall, the deck is in a very nice situation. They can play Prosperity if they really feel like the hit to Desires was too much. However, I feel like Desires was already a bit clunky in Skystriker, in my personal opinion, because of the 1 Engage and everything like that, and just how powerful Engage was. And so I'm going to keep it in the 1.5 category. I don't really have too much to say about it, other than the fact that without Imperial Order, it is super, super solid. Next up, we have Tri-Brigade, and guys, for the first time in, like, ever, I'm going to be putting Tri-Brigade in the tier 1.5 category. Granted, it is at the top. However, it is really, really odd seeing it in the tier 1.5 category, considering the fact that both Samorg and Recital Starling got absolutely massacred by the Forbidden Unlimited list. The deck loses a lot of its power and a lot of its consistency. Because Samorg, while I and a lot of... Actually, I don't even think it was a lot. I think I and a few other YouTubers predicted or asked for. The Samorg hit was completely justified and completely predictable and fine. However, the hit to Recital Starling to 1 was a bit overkill in my opinion. This is coming from a bird up player, so take that with a grain of salt if you want to. But I feel like it was a bit much because the deck didn't even top 2 both YCSs. It was just 1, which was really, really strange to me. But there's not really much we can do about it now. The deck did get hit severely, and while you can still do some sort of variation of combos, the end board is a lot lackluster, and you lack a lot of the follow-up that the initial version did, and so that really, really hurts. Granted, though, it is still a Tri-Brigade variant. You're mainly just playing Tri-Brigade pure, but with a small bird package in order to get more bodies on board, and so the deck is still fine because it is still Tri-Brigade. However, it's not as powerful as it once was, and it's not going to be dominating the top tables as much as it did. And so for the first time in literally ever, I'm going to be putting Tri-Brigade in the tier 1.5 category. So next up, we have Virtual World, and I'm going to put Virtual World actually above Tri-Brigade, and hear me out. So Desires to 1 really, really hurt the deck, honestly, because the deck was already a bit bricky, and so losing one of its best sources of draw power was really, really painful. However, E-Telly to 3 sort of balanced it out, because now you have a free way of getting Nyan Nyan on board even easier than before, and besides, you can just play something like Upstart Goblin if you really need to. And so I feel like the deck is still perfectly fine in that case, and not to mention that its end board is actually a bit stronger this format, considering that the best deck we're going to be getting to isn't quite here yet. We still have to find it through here. It's very, very good against that deck, considering that Kaliga shuts off all but 1 monster effect and 1 swing, not to mention that Crystal Wing can just negate the 1 effect that they get, and Chuchi being able to pop things before they can use their effect because almost nothing in that deck is on summon. It's very, very powerful, and so it's sort of a counter to that deck. Not to mention that it doesn't really get hurt too badly by Sword Soul. In fact, it can actually play Sword Soul in the deck, as well as being pretty evenly matched against something like Invoked. Not to mention that with Eldritch being at the top tables and 3 skill drain being around, the deck, while it doesn't enjoy playing through skill drain, it can play through skill drain because all of its things go from the hand. So it can basically just become sort of Chuchi and Synchro beatdown, or Synchronic Seas beatdown, which is still fine, honestly. It's not very great. But you do have things like Coral Dragon as well, where you can send it to the graveyard and still get free advantage off of that. So while it is strange seeing Virtual World above Tri-Brigade in this day and age, especially without something like VFD, yeah, I'm gonna have to put it above there, at least for now. It depends on what we see in the future. But yeah, Virtual World is going to be going at the top of our tier 1.5 section. So next up we have Prank Kids, and it's been a while since I put them here, I believe I've been putting them in Rogue, but I am going to be putting them at the slightly higher part of tier 2. They are still at 1 copy of Meow Meow, which is very, very painful for them, and they have to recycle it, which means they only get, 1 use of Battle Butler. However, they do have access to the brand new Adventure/Brave engine from the Grand Creators. Basically, you use the Wandering Griffin Rider, not to protect from Nibiru like a lot of other decks, but it honestly just protects from the Ash Blossom or any other hand trap that affects your normal summon of your Prank Kid. Also, they can use that because they don't have anything that works on normal summon, right? They normal summon a Prank Kid, they link away into the Meow Meow, and then it triggers Engrave. And so the Adventure token engine is very, very good for the deck. Not to mention that they probably won't like brick on it too much, considering that they are still running like, what was it, it's like 16 starters, right? So yeah, the deck's not going to experience like bricking like a lot of other decks would with the adventure token engine. And while its end board is a bit lackluster, it does have the ability, because of pranks, in order to recycle the Meow Meow over and over. They can just keep repeating their turns, not to mention the burning for 500 and gaining 1,000 every turn can be very, very frustrating for the opponent, especially in time. So overall, I think prank kids are going to be just fine, and while they're not going to be dominating the top tables like they were a few months ago, they are still going to be in our tier 2 slot. Next up, we have Earth Machine. Yeah, this is an Earth Machine hate channel, by the way, so sorry about that. Hero. So Hero did suffer a little bit from Fusion Destiny going from 3 to 2. However, they got Hero Lives to 2 copies, which is kind of absurd because that's just a free Vion or Stratos from their deck. And so I'm actually going to put Hero... I'm going to put them above Altergeist, right? Because yeah, it is the most expensive nib token you'll ever make, but the deck is still able to power out, you know, the Dark Law, the DPE, the Plasma, things like that, right? So I feel like the deck is perfectly fine, especially with multiple copies of a Hero Lives, being able to just get a free body from deck just from paying half your life points, which it doesn't really matter. So overall, I think the deck is in a perfectly fine spot. They can just hard make DPE, honestly. They don't need the Fusion Destiny. And so I'm going to be putting them right around the center of our rogue category. Next up is Phantom Knights, and I'm putting this as our top deck of February 2022. And I think it's a bit self-explanatory, but I will explain a little bit. The Grand creators did give us, again, the Adventure/Brave token archetype, and that single-handedly pushes the deck super far ahead, right? Because they are completely Nibiru-proof now, unless you have, like, Imperm Nib, I believe. I don't know if the Wandering Griffin Rider bounces itself for cost, so that can be really, really difficult for people to get through. So not only now do Phantom Knights have almost complete hand trap protection unless you open more than one, which, I mean, they eat more than one hand trap like candy anyway, but even if your opponent doesn't have any sort of hand trap or disruption on your turn, that's a free Omni Negate, right? That's a free Omni Negate on top of 2 pops, 2 Fog Blades, and then, like, maybe even a Scythe Lock if they're lucky enough to get that out, or like an Appaloosa or something. So that can be completely insane. Not to mention, again, this deck does chew through disruptions like it's absolutely nothing, and it can just keep playing through so many different interactions, right? It also maintains a very good balance of both back row and monster disruptions, again, with the 2 pops, one being from DPE and one being from the Rusty Bardage when you special the Break Sword, usually from your graveyard during your opponent's turn using a trap card engrave. But they also have the 2 Fog Blades, right? And Fog Blade is very powerful, being an infinite impermanence. However, it stays on the field, and it also prevents it from attacking, as well as being attacked, but that's not really important because they usually can just out the monster on their turn with something like Break Sword. And finally, they have access to things like Arc Rebellion, which is a really, really ridiculous OTK enabling boss monster, so they don't even need things like Access Code or Boral Sword. They can just go ahead and OTK with something that has over 12,000 attack. Overall, I think Phantom Knights are going to be absolutely crazy this format, and I think most YouTubers will agree with me, but tell me what you think about it in the comments below. Do you think it's going to be that good, or do you think it's all hype? Regardless of the answer, personally for my tier list, I will be putting it at the very top of our tier 1 slot. So next up we have Lyrilusk, like pure Lyrilusk, right? And man, the hit to Recital Starling was so bad that I think I'm gonna have to put it under Cyber Dragon. The deck was relatively serviceable as a high rogue, low tier 2 OTK deck, right? And also its end board wasn't the worst. It was like Draco Future, assembled for protection, and ensemble with like 4 or 5. But yeah, right now it's just, with the hit to Recital, it just can't do anything, man. I'm sorry. It's probably a little bit better than these because it ends off on more than one, like, body, right? And also it can still OTK rather serviceably, especially with things like Bird Sanctuary and in its arsenal, and Bird Strike if the opponent doesn't have any Omni Negates can out an entire board of only monster disruptions. But without the second or third, especially the third, Recital Starling, you're going to be in for a really bad situation. Not to mention the hit to Desires to 1 also hurt the deck's consistency because you would usually play like 2 Desires and then like 3 of every bird. And so overall, I feel like pure Lyrilusk isn't very good. Next up, we have Adamanticipators, and I will keep saying it, I think this deck is super, super slept on. even though we don't have 3 Block Dragon or even 1 Block Dragon, unlike Master Duel, I feel like the deck is really, really good. And while it does rely on RNG with your excavations, remember that this deck can Scythe Lock super easy. It's super freeform in what it can do. It can get a DD Crow effect, it can get a Spell and Trap negate, it can get multiple monster negates, it can get the Scythe Lock, it can get popping. It can basically do anything you want and more, not to mention things like Naturia Beast even. Overall, this deck is quite silly in my opinion, and I feel like it's super duper slept on. And so I feel as though more people should be hopping on it, and more people should be showcasing exactly what it can do. While I don't have a video showcasing exactly what it can do currently, I do have a video up on the channel that I'll probably be linking up in the corner about what it would do with even a single copy of Block Dragon here in the TCG. And so please keep in mind that this deck could just be 1 card unban away from being tier 1 again. And so for all those reasons and more, I'm going to be putting Adamantipator at the top of my tier 2 section. So next up we have Dragon Link, and Dragon Link is a bit of an interesting case in my opinion, because I don't want to put another thing in tier 1.5, but I'm going to put another thing in tier 1.5, because admittedly, yeah, I do shit on Dragon Link a lot, and I feel like it's really, really mediocre compared to a lot of other combo decks we've had, like Bird Up, but with the release of Destrudo, right? We have to think of the fact that Hulk is still around perfectly fine and all the sorts of engines that come along with it. With the release of Destrudo, this deck gets a lot more access to just free synchro summoning, free revival from grave that doesn't need things like Pisty or Red MD to constantly get the revives. So I do want to be a little bit less harsh on it than usual. So I will be putting it in the middle of tier 1.5, but keep in mind, again, that this deck really just doesn't have very much follow-up, right? That's the main reason I don't really think Dragon Link is as good as a lot of people like to hype it up to be. So just be careful when you're playing Dragon Link because of those things, but I feel like the deck can probably find some sort of really wacky combos with Destrudo. I'll have to see them for myself, but for now, just for like a little bit of an outlook, I'm going to be putting it in the middle of tier 1.5. Next up, we have Salamangre, and I'm not going to put another thing in Rogue because it's a bit crowded, and they did get Salamangre circled to 2 like I and a lot of other people predicted. It was either that or Gazelle to 2, like it was kind of a given. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to put Salamangre, I'm going to put it just below Prankids, right? Because they don't really have access to the Brave token engine or anything like that. And even though they did get a tiny consistency boost in that, they did lose Desires for some of the builds that did play it. Not to mention that the end board still isn't too crazy. It's like, what, a Rage and a Roar with like a Sunlight Wolf. And while they can OTK with either Transcode, Update Jammer, or Access Code because it's super free in that deck, yeah, it just really doesn't do much. It's also super fragile. So I'm going to be keeping it in the lower end of tier 2. But overall, the deck is still pretty serviceable. Over time, we'll slowly get all the pieces back together, but even with 3 of everything, I don't think it's going to be doing too much. The deck is a bit too fair in what it does, and so for those reasons, I'm just going to be keeping it in the very low part of tier 2. So next up, we have B-Trooper, and while B-Trooper didn't get anything like back off the ban list, actually, is there even anything that B-Trooper could use off the ban list? I don't know. I feel like the deck is pretty serviceable. Unfortunately, we're not getting any new waves of support anytime soon. Well, at least, like, not waves. We might get a single card here and there. We're not going to be getting any waves anytime soon because they have gotten out of the way to make way for the Libromancers coming out in Battles of Chaos and onward. And so I'm going to keep them in the lower, or not the lower end, but like the slightly higher end of tier 2. You know what? I'll be generous. I'll put it at the top of tier 2. The deck still doesn't really do too much on its end board. I feel like it can be pretty good going second now with all the going second options we've been given, but I still feel like B-Trooper still hasn't reached its full potential. I do hope we get more support or more generic insect good stuff here soon. We are getting the new tuner in Battles of Chaos, which I feel like can be really, really good, which is why I'm putting it at the top of tier 2. However, overall, I don't think it's going to be doing too much. I will like to see, however, what it does with the level 4 tuner. As not only does it get free bodies on board just by existing, right, but also it can banish your things like Resonance Insect, which, as we know, banishing Resonance Insect is this deck's favorite pastime. And I would like to see what it can do in terms of synchro-wise, because there are a couple of insect synchros, and while I don't think they're too crazy, I feel like they can be pretty fun. So I'm going to be putting B-Trooper at the top part of tier 2. However, until we get more generic insect good stuff, I don't think it's going to be moving from there anytime soon. Finally, we have Evil Twin, and I have been putting it in the higher part of Rogue, but I'll put it at the lower part of tier 2 for now, honestly. Yeah, unfortunately, the deck still isn't too great. It is very nice and simple though, and I feel like it is going to become more and more budget as time goes on. Not to mention that it isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just a bit underwhelming in what it does. However, it is one card combos, of course, and so while it did disappoint me and a lot of other content creators, I will be keeping it in tier 2, so props to you, Live Twin players, for keeping at it. But that's going to go ahead and be the end of my February 2022 Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta tier list. Here's a quick look. I'll just go ahead and allow you guys to bask in it for a second. While I do that, tell me what you think about it in the comments below. Do you agree with anything? Do you disagree with anything? Did I forget a deck? Did I add a deck that you think was a bit unnecessary? I don't know. Earth Machine players, go ahead and cry in the comments. I don't really care. And for those of you that watched all the way to the end, because I know this is going to be long, thank you. Thank you for not just skipping through. If you did skip through, burn. No, I'm just kidding. And a lot of people skip to the end. I can't wait to hear all the baby raging comments of people that did skip to the end, complaining that a deck got higher than theirs, or that their deck is missing. So, that's going to be really, really fun. But again, tell me what you think about it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please sure to leave a like on it, else I'll put this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended. And if you really like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my awesome Yu-Gi-Oh! Content and the rest of my tier list, I make a new one every month at the beginning of each month, or the end of each of the month beforehand, I should say, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're on our way to 1,000 subscribers, and we are currently at 798. As last time I checked, we might be at 800 now. But we are very, very close to our goal. We're trying to hit it by May, and so it would be really appreciated if you could go ahead and subscribe. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.